Welcome back to Bills in Business. I'm your host, Laura Carr, and today we're joined by Ryan Brannan. Ryan's the founder and principal of the Brannan Firm, a highly respected government affairs firm, and he has both experience in legislative and regulatory spaces. He's here to provide some insights on this session's challenges and priorities. And Ryan has served Texas from multiple angles as a 3-time gubernatorial appointee under both Governor Greg Abbott and Governor Rick Perry, and a former workers' compensation commissioner. He's also an advisor to Governor Rick Perry on his budget and policy, and his expertise spans a broad range of issues, including appropriations, public health, insurance, transportation, and infrastructure. So today we'll be talking about Texas's projected budget increase and how this additional funding can impact states' priorities, including Ryan's client expertise. We'll also touch on the broader shift to the right the Texas legislature has gone in, and how new legislators may influence the spending of these surplus funds. Ryan, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you here. And for those who don't know, we used to work together for 2 years, so it's always good to have a little reunion with you.
It is, and thank you for having me. It's great to see you too, Laura. It's funny you mentioned that. I enjoyed working with you. Now look at you. You're all grown up. Like proud papa moment over here was when I introduced you as a keynote speaker at one of my clients' conference. So congratulations, and thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
It was so much fun, and it's always fun to be working with you again in any capacity. So it's very good. So Ryan, for those who don't know you, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So Ryan Brannan, contract lobbyist, been around the Texas Capitol since 2009 when I moved down to Austin. First career job was for K. Bailey Hutchison in DC. We'll say a few years before that. Just really loving all the Capitol crowd and the people and representing clients, and it's doing exactly what I wanted to be doing when I moved down here, so it's pretty great.
Awesome. Well, it's an exciting time to be in Austin and around the Capitol and working in this field. We just had this amazing crazy election year in general. We had a bloodbath in the primary. We had this kind of sweep in this most recent election. So how's everything going with you on the business side?
It's going great. You're right. It is there's a lot going on right now. Right. We just had the election. They're filing bills now, so it's really here that we're coming back in January. It's just there's a lot happening. We've got big budget surplus. We have a new federal presidential administration. A lot of new faces at the Texas Capitol, some changes at the local level as well, so lots to keep track of.
Well, you mentioned the budget and projections in January where it was going to be going up 23% this year, roughly. How is that going to start impacting you this session?
Yeah, we'll see how much it ends up going up by the time we get there, but projections are still holding as to what they were in January. How it'll impact me, I think, will depend a lot on what the legislature decides to spend those funds on. Last session, they did a phenomenal job spending a lot of that money on one-time needs rather than ongoing needs that would become new programs, new ongoing expenses and appropriations for the state, that if we don't have the surplus that we have this time and we had last time, that could then become a real problem for the state. So they passed significant infrastructure bills, dedicating a lot of funding to all sorts of infrastructure, transportation, including the ports, which was something they don't normally fund very well, or haven't in the past, I should say. They're still doing the broadband rollout. There was a water fund done, conservation fund. So really there's a lot of infrastructure, much needed infrastructure, I should say too. A lot of the infrastructure is decaying. I mean, I'll use the Port of Galveston as an example. They turn 200 next year.
Wow.
Pretty amazing. They have some equipment out there that looks like it might have been here 200 years ago. So the state funding that the port master plan, at least a part of it, allowed Galveston to fund three projects, two of which they've already broken ground on, and that's already creating jobs, more economic development, more tourism money too. So those are just great things that you don't need to continue to spend on an ongoing basis in order to get really great results for the state. So we'll see what they do this time, but I think if they continue to keep a good eye on the funds like they did last time, I think the state of Texas will be in great shape to continue the economic dominance that they've been having, right? So a few years ago, I remember I was at a panel with several agency heads and statewide leaders, and the conversation, this was pre-Winter Storm Uri, pre-COVID, I believe, and the question presented at the Q&A at the end was, why is everybody moving to Texas? Why are all these companies moving to Texas? Of course, there's several different reasons for that, probably myriad reasons, really, but
I did it, yeah.
You did it,
I
yeah.
did.
Welcome back to Texas again. And the answer that came from the officials was because they know we have reliable infrastructure, that our electric grid works, that we have water, and literally less than a year later, none of that was true. But the thing is, they're still coming. You have greater demand on a lot of that infrastructure. I mean, USLege, AI, right? AI is using a lot of electricity.
No, we're not yet, but yeah, we'll have to start kind of looking at those things as we get bigger in scale, for sure.
Well, sure. Of course, not you, but AI in general.
AI in general, absolutely.
No, I'm sure you've got it all figured out, no doubt. You've got the storage, cloud storage facilities and all that are just taking up tons of electricity. None of that's going to stop anytime soon. So, using those funds to make sure that we can keep our infrastructure in place and keep the economy humming, I think is one way that the legislature can really help the state.
Well, as a former commissioner of a state agency, how do you see this budget impacting those agencies and programs?
Great question. And I think it depends on the agency. There are several agencies that are funded out of dedicated funding streams that probably won't have as much of an impact. But if you look at larger agencies, you look at, why don't we start with HHSC? They're the biggest one. So, and again, with the changes that are happening right now, not just at the state level, but the federal level and the local level, I think there's a potential anyway for some unprecedented change. Right? So, President Trump, or President-elect Trump, on the campaign trail talked about using block grants for Medicaid funding. Well, that would free up the state to get very innovative with a lot of their approaches, which actually takes me to another way that the state could really help. And we're wasting billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse in different programs. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody; it's all over. But there are solutions out there to capture a lot of that money before it ever leaves the state. Particularly if it's federal pass-through funds. Let's say the feds do, let's just use Medicaid as an example. Again, not pointing any fingers at anybody, but if the feds do innovative things like block grants for the states, and Texas receives those funds, then they can do new programs, new ways to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. And then you're not having to go chase those funds and try and recover them if they never leave the state in the first place. And that could save billions of dollars a year right there, which could then be used to fund some of the pet projects like the border wall or school choice or whatever state leadership decides they want to spend the money on. And that would also reduce the ongoing burden of the state government. So, those are two ways right away. Innovative solutions without looking at not spending waste, fraud, and abuse of money that's coming out of the state, spending the funds they do have this time on one-time things, not ongoing things. And then you can look at it at a program level too. So another state agency, and I'm not picking anybody, these are just the two big ones, HHSC and then TEA is the next biggest one. But they have programs that are designed to help school districts, supposed to be more of a last resort. Like if you can't find what you need on the private market, then you come to the state to get it. And we see it in a lot of insurance products, but this one is just an example. And what the state has done the last two cycles is actually fund the school districts that are with the state or help shore up their funding, and not the school districts that aren't with the state that are getting their services from the private sector. So it's had a reverse incentive in the market. You have more schools wanting to get those additional funds from the state that, by the way, may or may not be legal. I'm not going there, but if I was one of the school districts that didn't get additional funds from the state, I'd be upset. But really, you have the reverse incentive. Now you're taking this program that was for the insurer of last resort, and you're convincing all these school districts to come get in because they're getting additional funds at reduced rates, but it's not real. It's being propped up. It's not market rate. When really the state should be trying to convince as many schools as they can to get out of that state insurance of last resort. And that's been tens, $20 million over the last two. So that on a grander scale, it's a lot smaller than the billions you're talking about with HHSC, but you start looking around, combine all this stuff, and you can make some real positive changes for Texans and talk about lowering their taxes as a result of that, everything else. And it's obviously not just us, right? I mean, Elon Musk and his, what do they call it? Department of Government Efficiency?
Efficiency, yeah.
So, I mean, I think they're looking at that everywhere. And if you could start saving billions of dollars a year and you have billions of dollars in surplus, you can really start looking at some of these solutions. I don't want to say eliminate the property taxes, but I mean, maybe.
Government efficiency is definitely something we're looking into as well as we scale and helping with, now we're working with state agencies and other government organizations. It's going to be exciting to see how we can help.
I love what you're doing.
The efficiency. Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Well, you mentioned a lot here. One of the pieces that I want to kind of go back on is like aging infrastructure. You mentioned with the ports specifically. I know that you work with them, but what role do you see kind of other special projects and infrastructure projects playing in this session and Texas' future?
It's a massive deal. It's massive everywhere. And again, this is another cross section of the different levels of government, right? So they put in billions of dollars into infrastructure investment. And that's not just ports. I mentioned ports as an example, but it's roads. I mean, it could be land ports too, right? Like you look out at Laredo or El Paso, these are huge ports, trucks, people, everything else. And especially with the federal focus on the border now coming, and they are announcing a lot of stuff. We'll see if that actually happens, what they're talking about doing, but I mean, they're going to need some support there. And then the road, we've built roads. And I learned something recently. This is a little off topic, but you know me, I'm such a policy nerd when it comes to this stuff. Local governments budget differently than like you and I do with our project book. So like if you buy streetlights, there's not an ongoing depreciation put into place. And so over time, those assets diminish and they need to be replaced. And a lot of that is part of the infrastructure issues that we're facing all across the state.
Sure.
So if you can use these funds that aren't in the budgets for one time, you could say, let's say, I mean, streetlights, for example, they last, 25, 30 years. So if you could fund streetlights, you just save 30 years worth of stuff. So this is probably not the best example of streetlights, but just to get the point across on how these funds can be used. But again, looking at the tiers of government, federal, state, and local, let's say you're funding roads that go across, crisscross across the state. And how do you create those roads, right? You gotta have trucks, you gotta have concrete, you gotta be able to get the concrete, you gotta be able to get to the site. There's a lot that goes on there. And if you've got a concrete plant here under one set of regulations, but then that particular plant is in 8 different places, and their cost of doing business changes in all those 8 different places. And it's really hard to keep the cost low so that you could do more of these projects with the same amount of funds. And one example is I heard about not a concrete plant, although they have their own kind of fight going on right now, which is probably why they came top of mind.
Sure.
But like there's a plant up in it's not concrete, so I don't want to.
I know, we gotta be
I don't want to call anybody out.
I know.
But these folks that live in a emergency service district just voted to increase their tax base 2%. Well, all the marketing for that was this will cost the average homeowner $7 a year. Sounds great. I want emergency services and fire, and if I've got to pay $7 a year, I'll do it. Well, that doesn't take into account businesses, commercial. So that $7 a year for you and me in our house, for this business might be as much as 40, 50 grand a month. and that really stymies economic development and growth. So it's looking at all these different levels. The legislators and the decision makers are doing the Lord's work, trying to figure out the best way forward. And obviously, there's a lot of stakeholder participation, but we're on the front end. We got another 6 months to talk about this before the final budget comes out, before they adjourn signing die. So it'll be interesting to see. It's very exciting, and luckily I'll be able to track all those bills because of your bill tracking service that's working.
I know, it's awesome. It's been great the past couple weeks of bill filing. I love it. We mentioned a lot in regards to stability and things that the government and the members can do. You mentioned 6 months. We've got 7, 8 more months of discussions and an exciting time. So what do you think some things that the legislature can do to promote and continue the economic stability?
Yeah, I think there's a lot they can do, and I mentioned some examples of local government doing some things, but there's a lot of local governments doing right, and there's a lot of local governments that want to do it right. Austin's always the easy one to point out, right? But at a time when the state and literally the rest of the country moved in one direction, Austin doubled down the other direction. They only had one city council member that was pushing for any kind of government accountability. She was voted out of office. In another district, they had an avowed socialist from the Democratic Socialists of America win. So the city of Austin, their city council, took a hard political turn. And Kirk Watson, God bless him, he's doing the Lord's work over there, just trying to hold the thing together. There was a song that came out during COVID that was called God Bless the People Try to Hold This Town Together. And every time I hear it, I'm like, Kirk, man, good luck.
Yeah.
We're all rooting for you. But they are one of the reasons why there's a lot of bills filed at the legislature to rein in some of this local control. And of course, there's always a bad apple that ruins it for everybody. And a lot of times, that's the case. And I mentioned Austin, I'm sure it's not always them, but for every one of them, there's 100 people doing it right. And so it's trying to work through all those very complex policy issues. But obviously the decision makers have gotten it right so far. I'm sure they've misstepped here or there, but you look at all those trophies behind the governor's desk, governor's trophies, the governor's cup for the state that created the most jobs the year before. I think there's, I'm guessing, but 15 or 16 in a row. We're doing something right, and so it's just making sure that we can keep up with what we're doing.
How do you keep up with, I know you track local, state, and federal, how do you keep up with all that during session?
Well, I have a couple great apps. One of them is called USLege.ai. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked that, because I used to have you to help me keep track of all that stuff, and then it looks like you found a virtual assistant to do all that.
I just did what I didn't want to do. It was so annoying and frustrating. Absolutely. I'm thinking as well with the local side, because that's very hard to find transparency into, and it's an area we're looking to go into. So it's just a lot to keep track of, and now a new administration at the federal level. So curious, what else you do?
Yeah, it depends on. Obviously, I get hired to represent my clients' best interests and what they're trying to get accomplished. So I think they're the best, and what they're trying to get accomplished is best for the state of Texas. I'm sure other people don't see it the same way, but the best part about our process is you can get together and try and navigate the best way forward. And that's true at every level. We just actually had, my neighborhood just had their local elections and switched over the board because the previous board disagreed with what our neighborhood was trying to do, and that went to an election, and 91% of the neighborhood voted for this to happen. And
I was following along with that one.
You were. You helped me out with that. So I try to bring up stuff that you were helping me out with. We have a speakers race.
We do.
I think. I don't want to predict. Certainly don't want my name predicting.
That's okay.
But that has a potential for a lot of change as well. We have a lot of new faces anyway. You know, a lot of them came in on a wing of change in the primary, particularly over the border. A couple other issues. School choice was one that was turned into a primary issue. And so, you know, I think a lot of them are very hungry to get started with making these changes. Certainly some of them have more experience than others. I think there's one that runs a bunch of different businesses. He'd probably be a great person to look at on some of these appropriations issues. And so I think whenever there's new faces, a lot of it's education. Like, you know, when you first came on, started lobbying, there was some education there. Just so same with them. And I know that a lot of the legislators in the House were just here for a bunch of workshops and things like that. And so they're learning, and it's focusing. So, you know, the first day of bill filing, this time there's more bills that were filed than any other session.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even include these new people because they can't file bills yet until they get sworn in. And so usually when new members come in, they have a lot of ideas, and some of their ideas are good and some of them aren't, but nobody ever wants to hear their baby's ugly. So you know, so we'll see. I think you know, if properly focused, I think the new energy could be something that is really beneficial for the state. I think you know, if the House devolves into bomb throwing and name calling and everything like that, I don't think that helps anybody. So hopefully we can pull everybody together and get what needs to be done to keep Texas.
I love it. So you've mentioned that there's going to be a new shift. We know there's a lot of new faces this session. So how do you see this new cohort of people influencing priorities this session, if at all?
That's a great question, and I think one that everybody that's observing this election cycle is wondering. I'm actually kind of advising my clients to temper expectations for the moment as to what can get done in this environment, but there's a lot of grass on the field between now and when they gavel in. And so there's plenty of time for a lot of these issues that are perceived to work themselves out. I think they will do it. I think we'll get there. We have some great statesmen that are in solid staff positions. Leadership changes within the governor's office appear to be good, although I'm not saying that the previous guys, in fact, I'm friends with several of them, don't take that way.
Yeah.
And you know, we had some changes, turnover in the speaker's office too, and a lot of those people have worked together in the past, which I think is going to help. Again, I'm not saying that they're better or worse at their job. I think everybody's doing a great job, but I think it does help that there's prior relationships and working experience with each other. We'll see if that stays. Obviously, you have a lot of the new faces ran primaries against the incumbents that voted for the speaker, but I do think that we got a couple months to figure it out. At the end of the day, freshmen or freshmen, no offense to the freshmen, but you know, it's hard to pass legislation in this state at all, let alone if you're still trying to figure out where the bathroom is in the building. And there's a lot to learn, and so I think there's a great opportunity to get some really good things done for Texas this session. I'm hoping that that comes to fruition, and we'll find out what happens when they gavel in. First, the two things they do are pick a speaker in the House and pick the House rules. So
lots of unknown the next couple of months.
There are, and again, like to your original point, that's why it's such a interesting time right now with a lot going on. There's just a lot.
I know. We got the holidays. I don't know how we are going to be able to do it. It's an exciting time, I will say. I know you said there's a lot they have to learn. You mentioned just knowing which way to go to the bathroom, where's the speaker's office, right? They have to learn all those things.
Oh, you remember your first few times at the Capitol?
Oh yeah,
it's especially down the extension.
So confusing.
It all looks the same.
I can't imagine for a new member, and I know there's been a lot of talk of reform and transparency, and do you think that that's kind of we're seeing on the federal level and nationwide this government efficiency. Are you seeing that trend in Texas too?
Yes, I think so. I know there's a big push for it, especially on the local level. It seems like there's really, you had the Death Star bill last session. Love it or hate it, no comment. It was designed to kind of level the patchwork quilt of regulations that I mentioned earlier, with the different areas having different tax rates, different regulatory requirements, everything like that, to make it easier for business. So do they continue forward with that? Do they kind of say, well, maybe we went too far over here? Remains to be seen, but those are definitely issues that they're looking at. I know there's been a lot of discussion on property tax and property tax reform. There's some discussion on special purpose districts, and they'll go out and they create all these taxing entities, and then they kind of forget about them, and they just keep raising taxes on everybody. And so, ultimately, it's finding ways to reduce the tax burden on your Texans so that they can continue to live in prosperity. And I think we've outlined several great ways that they could do that, right? One-time expenditures on things like infrastructure, looking at reducing waste, fraud, and abuse in the current expenses, and then also additionally, reducing some programs that aren't supposed to be big in the first place. It's not just federal, the state's definitely looking at those things. And I think if they can do that, again, they've got a real shot at reducing the property tax burden on Texans, and then you'll really see the economy
That would be great.
go.
That would be great. You mentioned kind of local government mixed in with state government, and how kind of what role do you see the state playing in addressing some of the local issues we're seeing? Less funding for the police and law enforcement, and issues at the border, all that.
That's a great question, and I think obviously these things are real issues, right? And it's really the federal government's job to secure the border. That's one of the three things the government really has to do, and is whiffed. And so the state ended up having to pay a lot of those costs, which doesn't help with the budget. When a lot of these funds that they're not supposed to pay for out of the general revenue or scraped ARPA or wherever the funding mechanism was, goes to those places. You saw, in Austin, when all of that was going on with their police department and the reduction in troops and the defund the police, the state government had to come in and patrol parts of the streets of Austin, which I was glad to see recently that the Austin Police Association was able to get a contract with the city. Again, I think Kirk's doing the Lord's work as mayor, trying to keep that town together, as the song goes. But it's not fixed. The Austin Police Department is down 300 policemen. Morale is all-time low. So I think there's places like that where the state can look at, why is morale low? Why what are the underlying causes of this that we can fix? And but the problem with the state is, typically anyway, unless you can figure out different ways, and they are possible, but as a general rule, the state has a hammer, not a scalpel. So if one municipality is doing something they shouldn't be doing, chances are a lot of other municipalities that aren't doing anything wrong are going to get caught up in that. So it's finding that balance and figuring out where the state can come in that makes this whole process so exciting, right? You take all the ideas from all over the state, all the experts, all the different stakeholders and interested parties, the taxpayers, the citizens, and you roll them into a ball and you stick them in one building for 5 months and see what comes out. And they don't always get it right. We do have cleanup bills and things like that, but for the most part, the process works, and it's been working in the state for a long, long time.
Well, that makes me happy to hear. The faith in the system. I love that. That makes me very happy. Well, Ryan, you have given so much expertise to us today, just your insights into budgets, little predictions for the legislative session, what's happening in local state government. You're talking a little bit about, Medicaid and opportunities and kind of challenges you're dealing with. Any final thoughts or, anything unique you'd like to add about the session coming up?
I just want to say, thank you for working with me, Laura. I learned everything I know about lobbying from working with you, so it's been a great pleasure.
Well, you could definitely end with a tale. What was your favorite experience working together 2 years ago?
My
Anything you want
favorite
to share?
experience.
Yeah, your favorite story.
Oh man, how do I narrow it down to one favorite experience? There was a cacophony of experiences, Laura, that were all wonderful in their own unique ways. What is jumping out right now is when we were talking. I think this was pretty early on. You may be able to flesh in some of the backstory of what was going on in your life at the time, but you would come in and we were talking about maintaining professionalism, and you were saying that you were going to be focusing on that and making sure that you presented yourself in a professional manner. And then we walked outside and you showed me your new license plate. And it said Partay. And as I'm reading it, you look over and you go, Partay! Just like that. And I thought, that was a good 30 seconds.
You could not stop laughing. And then
I'm still laughing about it.
I immediately
that may be my
started
number
laughing.
one.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I remember it because there's so many stories about that license plate, but R.I.P.
Especially now that I know how Partay ended up, yeah.
R.I.P. Partay wagon. Yeah.
The Partay wagon?
The Capitol grounds. I can't keep it a secret, Ryan. People found out. That's why I'm not ashamed to tell this story.
Okay.
Because
But I'm glad I picked that story.
I'm glad you did, actually, because so many people, one person I didn't even know in the Capitol goes to me, oh yeah, I heard about your car. And I just thought, no. So anyone who doesn't know, I totaled my car in the Capitol grounds.
Is there a way you can put that picture up on
Yes,
the podcast?
I'll include it in there.
Please
and
do.
I will just say, be careful when you badge in, guys.
And that,
Not always going to protect you.
That vehicle had a lot of stories in it.
It did. It
I
had
remember
for 4 years.
we were driving back from an event in the Fort Worth area, and you were driving, but it was pouring down rain, and so I had to get back for something. So we pulled over, and I drove. And I get all the way back to Austin, and pull up next to the Capitol, and I start getting phone calls. Is that your car, Partay? I'm like, of course.
So sad.
A lot of mileage in that vehicle. That was
a lot of road trips I did. We did a lot of Texas Worldwide Tour.
The Worldwide Texas Tour.
Worldwide Texas Tour. Good times, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for joining. And would you like to shout yourself out where people can find you if they need a fabulous lobbyist like yourself?
Happy to do so. Thank you, Laura.
Yes.
Ryan Brannan, BrannanLLC.com. Office just around the corner from here near the Capitol. But if you need me over the next 5 months, you could just knock on the front door of the Capitol and I'll open it and let you in.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it, and make sure to subscribe to stay tuned. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Laura.